Morning. What's that?
Yes, I am.
It's usually 50 minutes.
You do the 210 too?
I got it. Weekly. All side streets.
Really? Wow.
And then the two, then I got off the north. We're not going to be starting yet. We're going to wait for one other member. So we wanted to let everybody know that might be listening in as well, that we'll be starting the meeting momentarily. What we can do, if you'd like, for those of you that are here, we'll go ahead and open it up for, while it's not required, since it's a special committee meeting and it doesn't have an actual voting agendized item. It's just the initial meeting. And before we kick that off, we could go ahead and go into public comment. And so we do have some comment cards as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and put a minute on the clock for all these individuals. And again, just wanted to reiterate, it's not necessarily required, but I feel that you've all come in this morning as well. So we'll go ahead and hear it. This is a special meeting, and it is an ad hoc committee. With that, on an ad hoc committee, we'll be meeting for the next 6 to 8 months on a regular basis. The first regular scheduled meeting will take place in January. The special meeting was set forth as an opportunity to bring the members together, just to set the idea and goals and objectives for the ad hoc that will then come to the full City Council with a report or recommendations based on that. And so we'll go ahead and discuss all of those perspectives as well. So we can go ahead and open it up for public comment. I'm going to ask for if we can get 2 more chairs at the table as well. Oh, thanks, Frank. Appreciate it. Becky Dennison. And if I don't have any cards in yet, since we've already started, I'll just go with the cards that are already in hand. If you fill out cards after the fact, then we'll go ahead and note and file that we received those cards. Since we've already started and have the cards in hand. Becky Dennison, Wesley Walker, Chancellor, followed by Greg Spiegel. And then I have 2 more cards. It'll be Andy Burke and Janet Kelly. And again, any other cards, we'll go ahead and note and file that we received those as well. So you'll be part of the public record as submission. And we have a quorum. Thank you, Mr. Fuentes, Mr. Huizar. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, please.
Good morning. My name is Becky Dennison, and I work with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and we work with low-income residents, mostly tenants of downtown and South Los Angeles. And we were adamantly opposed to the original Community Care Facilities Ordinance, thought it was very overbroad, would have eliminated much housing in a city that is in great need of housing, and particularly for its lowest income tenants, and that shared housing is a resource for our communities. And if there are some small problems with certain operators, that we can address those through an enforcement mechanisms that are on the record already, and we'd be happy to help with that. We want tenants, all tenants, to be living in safe and healthy conditions. And so we believe that the purpose of this committee, actually, if there is one at all, would be to actually identify what the clear problems are and make sure that we're not overreaching in legislation and eliminating housing from a city that is in great need of housing and in a housing crisis that's growing even more. I also do want to say that I think that 24 hours notice for the first meeting is not appropriate given the number of people that were engaged in this issue.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Wesley Walker, and I'm a member of Los Angeles Community Action Network. And I'm an elder. I'm over 60, and back some time ago, I was in a treatment program, and it was quite hard for me and others like myself to acquire housing. And since then, I found out that we do have a shortage of housing in the city of Los Angeles. So I'm adamantly against this ordinance being brought up again because we have so many people that are on the side. You know, we have a majority of the people that don't want this ordinance to happen because of that fact.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Chancellor Almanzor, the Executive Director of the Housing Rights Center. We combat housing discrimination and we promote equal access to housing opportunities. And we do this for the City of LA and the County of Los Angeles as well, and also for Glendale, Pasadena, and a number of other cities. I'm also a resident of the City of Los Angeles and a longtime legal services attorney in Los Angeles, very well aware of the dire need of affordable housing in Los Angeles, especially for persons who are disabled, persons who can't afford appropriate housing, and for people of color as well. We were asked by the Housing Department and others as well to look at this proposed ordinance years ago when it was first proposed, and we have submitted lots of written comments about our concerns that there are potential fair housing violations with this ordinance. And while I understand it's been tweaked to dismiss some of those violations, we're still concerned, and we definitely want to be at the table as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Morning.
Good morning. I'm Greg Spiegel of the Inner City Law Center, and I'm here as a representative of the coalition that opposed this ordinance last time around. There's about 200 member organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, California Apartment Association, City Association, housing providers, nonprofits, religious groups, a very broad coalition concerned about the perhaps unintended consequences that would eliminate tens of thousands of units of housing under the original proposal. So we want to make sure that whatever is discussed here, that the specific problem is really identified and made clear and documented the extent of it. We think last time it was a little unclear what exactly we're going at. And if we can do that and identify a specific problem and have a solution that's narrowly tailored to that problem, that doesn't unnecessarily discriminate or hurt the most vulnerable in Los Angeles, we want to be part of that solution process. We really do. And we look forward to working with you. And it would help if we had a little more than 24 hours notice, and it would make it a lot easier. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you. And while the final two speakers come up, if I could, I'll just address the issue of 24-hour notice and opportunity. There's going to be plenty of opportunity to weigh in on this, and I'm going to open that up. When I go into my opening comments, I'll address that as well and talk about the opportunity for everybody here to have a seat at that table and address a lot of those issues and where we're at and where we're starting over. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Andrew Burke. I am one of the attorneys at the Disability Rights California. We still have concerns with this ordinance as outlined in the comments and cover letter that I have given each of you a copy of. We do hope that future meetings do have more than 24 hours notice because people with disabilities need time to request reasonable accommodations to fully participate in the meeting. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And our final speaker, Janet Kelly.
Hi, my name is Janet Kelly, and I'm not going to reiterate what my former colleagues just stated, but, you know, this has been an issue that's been so polarizing to the city, and it is my hope that as an ad hoc committee is convening and preparing and putting together its strategy, that it has the best interests of LA's vulnerable at heart, and that it's and that your actions are not discriminatory against not only people of color, but people who have economic limitations within the city. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm going to open it up to my colleagues, but before I do that, yeah, and the other cards that came in after we started public comment, and if you came in late, I just wanted to let you know a couple things. One, There was actually, since this is a special meeting and there's no agendized vote on anything, it's an initial meeting, the city attorney has informed us that there was actually not even a need to take public comment. But with that, I always feel it's fair to do that, particularly those who come in. Having said that as well, if comment cards, and I made the announcement when we started public comment, if they came in after we started public comment, they will be noted and filed as part of the record as well, as we do in council and as we do in other committee meetings as well. But having said that, we're going to have a lot of meetings on this item. There will be several regular scheduled meetings that start in January, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for a lot of folks to share a lot of information and have a dialogue, and so we look forward to that as well. Having said that, the idea of this ad hoc committee meeting is a couple things. One, it's not starting off with what we did or a draft ordinance or a proposed ordinance or what we had. It's starting with a fresh piece of paper, a blank piece of paper, and the spirit of which is to ensure that we protect not just that affordable housing element, but those housing programs and organizations that service such a critical need citywide. Those for the disabled, those for those in need. There will be no discriminatory actions whatsoever in anything that comes out of this committee. And it'll address all of those concerns and create a partnership to address all the concerns that have been brought up. The spirit of that is, and one on a personal note, I have a personal experience with boarding care facilities that aren't either licensed or protected, and there are, and we are well aware that, and I say personally because my sister, before she passed away, was in a home that was horrific, and I've seen firsthand a lot of facilities that are terrible, and then I've seen a lot of facilities, the majority of the facilities, that are terrific. And particularly a lot of facilities that don't have the ability to get a state license. And so we've recognized that, and we'll come up with an avenue to ensure we protect credible operators as well. And that is a lot of what came out of the history in the conversations that occurred over the last several years. Having said that, there are a proliferation as well of what I will call criminal operators, particularly that have a history of warehousing people, people that are most vulnerable in society. And those are the ones that we want to focus on in terms of looking at either the current laws we have on the books as well as enhancing and updating them to reflect current state laws, what the courts have weighed in on. There's been a tremendous amount of outreach, and that will continue as we move forward to develop these initiatives. And so with that, it's critically important that we do protect these housing programs for those vulnerable in society, those veterans, those at risk, those disabled, and they have a fair place in every community to operate. But we want to make sure and ensure that they're, and I'm speaking for me, that they're protected as well. The communities are protected, but the very people who are living in those establishments are checked on, that there's a checks and balance, but it's done so not to impede their privacy either. And so we want to make sure that they are protected because we've seen incredibly dangerous conditions as well. And so it's creating that balance and that balance of fairness and protection. And so that's what we'll be looking at. I know it's a very emotional issue. There's a lot of people that have engaged in this on all sides. And so with that, and I want to open it up to my colleagues for their input. And then with that, I would also like to then bring the planning department to the table, building and safety, and talk about their history with this, if we could, and their experience as the professionals and part of the city staff to testify as well. So with that, I'd like to open it up to Councilmember Weezer.
Thank you, Mr. Englander. And first I want to thank Councilman Englander for trying to address legitimate concern about nuisance activity at certain group homes. I understand that concern in Eagle Rock and northern part of my district. We've had this issue for some time with some problematic operators. And so we do want to focus on nuisance abatement and enforcement and make sure we have functioning enforcement for those problematic homes. But whatever we do, I'm hoping we do not limit the options for providing services for those people who need them. It adds, anything we do, I hope we don't add burden to those folks who are either close to being homeless or not getting the types of services they need. And particularly I'm concerned that as we look at any proposal that we address what it has shown to be very successful and something that the United Way and others are working on right now at a county level to address homelessness and to address people who have special needs. And that is 2 points that I think I want to just put out now so that we are aware of what some of the larger agencies in the county are working on to help address some of the issues that are related to what we will be working on in this committee. And that is that there is a need to spread services geographically so that people can receive services when they are sliding toward homelessness, where they have familiarity with the neighborhood and access to whatever support systems they may have in those neighborhoods. We need to provide a broad range of services tailored to the needs of people, be it alcohol treatment or drug rehab, veteran issues, mental health issues, abuse, etc. People have different needs, and that calls for different types of environments to meet those needs. I think those are the two prongs that overall overarching policy objectives that we should keep in mind as we work on this particular issue that is related to the overall issue in the area concerning this. So just to summarize, one, I would hope we focus on nuisance abatement and enforcement in those problematic group homes, but keep in mind that there's an overarching policy that the county is headed in that we need to support with those two prongs.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for asking me to be a part of this ad hoc committee. I, like many people who at the time was not serving on the council, like many people was concerned about some of the things that I had read about in the proposed ordinance. So for you to bring together this process and to start from scratch, I really, really appreciate it. I think that's a very significant opportunity for all of us. I would say that there's a real opportunity for us. My colleagues have talked about some of the challenges that we see in the community, and having served my neck of the woods for over 15 years, there are problem operators, and I think the point was made by some of the public comment that there's ways to address that directly now with the enforcement tools that the city has. But I also think there's a real opportunity for us to really review and see how we can really improve the distribution of these very important facilities. And so I actually look at it from the other perspective, that we have an opportunity through the conditional use permit, which is why I'm so happy that Mr. Weezar is here from the land use perspective, to try to figure out how to be more equitable in the distribution of these very important housing services. I will say, though, that I think areas like Council District 7, probably 14, 9, 8, 1, have a disproportionate share of the burden that I think is really important for us to all shoulder. And it's largely, I think, due to lack of civic participation and the economics of real estate. It's just a lot less expensive to have homes and rents and that sort of thing. And I think that's all well and good. I'm eager to do my share, and CD7 has. But I think there's an opportunity here to figure out through land use mechanisms how to incentivize more permanent supportive housing for all classes of service throughout the entire city. And I think there's another opportunity, and we're going to be talking about it today in housing as it relates to how we create a pipeline for these types of housing opportunities. And some of the challenges there, I think, are going to be directly impacted or could impact this process. As we do the planning for these types of uses, it's really important for us to be mindful of where people's services, to your earlier point, Councilmember Huizar, are and how do people get there. We should try to do as much alignment as possible to facilitate the success of these homes and facilitate every opportunity for people to get better quickly. And that means aligning it with transportation nodes. It means making sure that we have positive elements in the community near the siting and permitting of these uses. So I'm actually very excited about the potential that this committee is going to have in putting together a good piece or a proposal for the council to consider. I also would ask our audience and stakeholders in this conversation to really be open to trying to figure out what's good about permanent supportive housing and these types of facilities and what's bad. And let's have a conversation about how it is that we can tweak all of this so that it works better for all of us. So I admire your willingness to reach out, talk to these folks, have working group meetings, and hopefully have a very healthy dialogue here in committee so that we can offer a proposal that's worthwhile. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and thank you for both your comments as well. And that's my hope, and which is why this is the only ad hoc on the entire City Council. That's how important this is. And we've recognized, rather than shoehorn it into various committees, although the majority of it would be Plum, it would also be public safety as it relates to building and safety. It would also be housing, an ad hoc of bringing all those specialists and expertise and focus where you've got one agenda not crammed with 30 other items that aren't relevant, where we can have that dialogue and that conversation. In the spirit of this meeting, once again, the idea is more of a kickoff than a conversation, if you will, which is why it was called for a special meeting rather than having the conversation start in January at the regular meeting. The actual dialogue and real work, and we'll roll up our sleeves, will begin at the first meeting in January, and we're excited about that. And that's where we'll have the other members of the committee as well that will be able to participate. One was out of town. We had a conversation. It was he couldn't make it, but it was, again, a special meeting brought together just as an idea to let people know we were actually doing it. Not, well, we didn't know you were doing an ad hoc, and then even if we posted it weeks in advance and it comes out and it's in January, people weren't aware of it. We want to get the message out to all the key stakeholders that we are going to be doing this, that we are starting this in January in terms of a regular meeting. But the important thing is this. The important thing is what both of my colleagues, in the spirit to which they just shared, that we need to ensure that we protect this housing element throughout the city of Los Angeles. It's critically important. And I'm going to emphasize that it needs to be one of the best, I think, pieces of legislation that ever came out of California, quite frankly, was the Ladderman Act. And Frank Ladderman, who was assembly member at the time, said that those that are disabled should not be warehoused and should not be institutionalized, that they should live within all of our communities equally, that we should provide housing opportunities. I think it was one of the best pieces of legislation to come out of California in a long time. And the spirit of that is not just the disabled, but so many others. But with that, we have to also ensure protections for those people who are most vulnerable. And so there will be that combination. Hopefully that comes out of this as well. And again, with a fresh lens and a fresh set of eyes. To which I also want to dispel some of the rumors, as we'll have some of those conversations as we go through this, that there are a certain number of different types of housing in different council districts. A lot of people don't mention CD3 or CD12, that they think, well, those are big, expensive properties. In fact, it was oftentimes operators will buy those properties because they are bigger homes. So they can put 30 or 40 people. We have one that has 52 people currently in it, approximately, is the count. It changes, it varies. And so with that, I'd like to, if I could, call up the planning department and just give us an overview on what they've done, when they started working with this, sort of the history, and building and safety as well. to address just an overview. We'll get into detail starting in January, but just an overview of your perspective and the history and sort of where we're at. Great. Good morning.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Alan Bell, Deputy Director of the Planning Department. With me is Tom Rothman, who's a senior planner in charge of co-studies, and
Frank Bush. I'm the Chief of the Code Enforcement Bureau for Building and Safety.
So I personally have actually been working on this issue since 1997 when Councilman Rudy Savornich established a working group on the council to address this particular issue. And at that point, the Planning Department did provide to the council an interim report on special needs housing. So certainly the council has had a lot of history in terms of trying to address this particular issue. When we started working on this particular assignment, I believe it's been 5 years since the Planning Department responded to the Councilmember Smith motion to address this particular issue. We realized two things. In 1973, the state of California adopted the Community Care Facilities Act. That's over 40 years ago. And since that time, the city of Los Angeles has never actually implemented those state code provisions at the local level. And as a result, there's been a great deal of confusion about exactly what is the legal landscape in terms of licensed community care facilities in the city of Los Angeles. So we have been hamstrung as a city, as a planning department, as an enforcement agency because of the lack of clarity in terms of the applicability of that 1973 Community Care Facilities Act in the city of Los Angeles. So one of the objectives that we approached with this particular ordinance was to clarify those regulations. A significant part of the ordinance addresses licensed community care facilities and provides a public benefit provision to make sure that the variance process, the adjustment process, and all those other kind of cumbersome red tape processes would not apply to licensed community care facilities of 7 or more. As you know, if there's a licensed community care facility that has 6 or fewer residents, is considered to be the equivalent to a single-family residence, and so therefore is exempt from local regulation. But if there are 7 or more residents, then it is subject to local regulation, and we wanted to clarify that and actually promote and make sure that those larger licensed facilities were going to have a place within our zoning code and a place within our zoning regulatory system. On the flip side, for unlicensed facilities, those kinds of boarding houses, sober living homes that aren't, by their very nature, actually eligible to receive a license from the state because they don't provide that professional care and supervision that a licensed facility does provide. We have a 1956 definition, quite a long time ago, obviously, of what a boarding house is. So we haven't updated those regulations in over half a century. So one of the consequences, I think, of this lack of clarity and specificity has been a great deal of confusion. What is a boarding house? What is a family residence? Our regulations are so out of date that it causes a great deal of problems, certainly for the Department of Building and Safety, to be able to take enforcement action based upon the lack of clarity in terms of those regulations. So do we have a system right now to be able to separate out the good operators versus those that are performing inappropriately? We do not. And that was one of the objectives that we tried to tackle with this particular approach. I think that it's very important. I'm encouraged with the concept of taking a fresh start. Certainly with the recent adoption of our housing element, we need to be mindful of the need of how community residences and other kinds of facilities can play an important role. Shared housing can play an important role in addressing our housing needs. On the other side, we also have longstanding provisions that talk about the importance of providing character and protection for our single-family neighborhoods and to make sure that those residential neighborhoods have protections. So I think that we're at a good place right now to try and make sure that we have a fresh perspectives and a fresh pair of eyes to address this thorny issue. Certainly, it's an issue that has been bedeviling the city for over 2 decades, and I think a lot of it again is just the consequence of the fact that we haven't drilled down at the regulatory level in terms of the 1973 Community Care Facilities Act and our 1956 regulations on boarding houses. And I think we have a real opportunity to address that issue. I just wanted to talk, let Mr. Rothman address the community outreach that we went through over the last few years, just to give a flavor in terms of the dynamics and what we heard through that whole community engagement process.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for that history and overview. I think it's extremely helpful to keep that on the record as well, and we'll revisit some of those things. And if you actually could, perhaps we'll ask for that, if there's a way to have a written history of what you just went over that we can make part of the official record. We'll go through that in January. That'd be great. Excellent. Thank you.
Tom Rothman. As Alan mentioned, we started working on this after the Greg Smith motion of 2007. So basically, in 2008, we started doing our initial research. So from 2008 until last year, we worked pretty steadily on a community care facilities ordinance. It was heard by the CPC twice. It was heard by Plum several times. Actually 4 times by Plum. Went to full council. It also went to the Public Safety Committee twice, and we had about 3 dozen public outreach meetings. So we went to neighborhood councils, we went to plan check, we've had individual briefings, I think, with every council office. So we did our good share of outreach for this project. I mean, and then it ended about a year ago at City Council. So we did a number of outreach meetings with all the interested parties.
Excellent. Thank you. And it's 3 dozen, so
about 3 dozen I counted. Yes.
36 public outreach meetings.
36 outreach meetings with private groups, nonprofit agencies. They weren't always citywide. We had about 18 citywide meetings. Where we held them in different area planning commission regions of the city. We held them in the North Valley, South Valley, the East Side, but about 3 dozen total outreach meetings.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Mr. Bush.
On the code enforcement end, this has been a frustrating task to deal with enforcement-wise because of the clarity of the language, as Alan Bell mentioned there, and having these things clarified and the wording in the code will help us clearly do some enforcement. In code enforcement, we get, as Councilman Englander mentioned, we get to deal with a lot of the problem operators that are really causing problems in the neighborhoods, where they pack people into these houses, they do construction, and they build small rooms with no egress to get out, emergency exiting, and create a lot of hazards in these things. We've experienced quite a few of those things. So it is an issue with the bad operators on there. We don't hear about the good operators because the neighbors don't complain about them when they're there. And part of the frustrating part is dealing with the community members turning the complaints, and they have an expectation that we're going to do something. And because of the limitations in the language that's in the code, it prevents us from doing some full enforcement on some of these issues. So having that clarified is really good. And I'm happy to be invited to be in the ad hoc committees to listen and to be able to provide some input as far as enforcement goes, along working with planning in the city attorney's office. Right. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and all the time and effort, tremendous amount of time and effort that you've all put into this as well over the years. Like I said, we're going to look at this from a fresh set of eyes. We're going to look at this as an opportunity to provide housing and ensure that that housing is protected and safe for the community and the residents of those units as well. That's critically important to strike that balance with the ability to have enforcement for those ones that are not providing a quality program. Fortunately, the majority, if not the supermajority, of programs out there from our experience, Home for Good, New Direction, so many others, have done such a phenomenal job. And many of these don't have the opportunity to actually go out and get state licensed, as was discussed. So we're going to look at what we can do in the city to help, what we can do to upgrade some of those licensing opportunities, if you will. And those are the things, the various things we'll explore through this committee. And so I appreciate that input as well. And is there anybody from housing that would like to speak on this as well? From the housing department?
I just want to add that we certainly look at it as a real partnership with the housing department as we go further on this.
Well, I think that's critically important. Absolutely.
Good morning. My name is Claudia Monterrosa, and I'm the Director for Public Policy and Research at the Housing and Community Investment Department. And we, too, look forward and working very closely with this new ad hoc committee, closely working with the Department of City Planning as well as Department of Building and Safety. And it's a great opportunity that we have to really assess the different issues that came forward last year, over the last 2 years, and hopefully we can reach a consensus and a real true solution to the issues that were brought up during that process.
And I saw you here, so I wanted to welcome you and make sure that you have a seat at this table as well as part of these discussions and the input and what we're doing, because that partnership is critically important. Your input, your expertise, working with your staff, and having you there at the beginning of the process. Because I look at this, as much as we want to say we've put so much time and effort into this over so many years, this is a new beginning. It's a new lens. It's new council members as well from a different perspective. It's a new city family, and we're gonna take this from a different approach. Which I'm excited about, because I think we could, rather than throw out, if I could use an analogy that was in a letter to me recently, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to protect and preserve affordable housing, disabled housing, housing for homeless, transitional living, long-term care, boarding care facilities, sober living facilities that are all reputable and doing a good job, that don't have the ability to get licensed because of the state requirements. We want to protect those that are doing a good job and expand them, quite frankly, because there's a tremendous need. And particularly here in Los Angeles, there's a tremendous and growing need. And we've got to look at that partnership. And so there's an important balance, a fragile balance, that's what we hope to tackle with this. Mr. Price, thank you. If you wanted to add to the conversation as well, thank you. Good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before you go to Mr. Price, on housing, just one quick comment. The last time we went through this, there was some confusion and disagreement as to whether what was being proposed violated the federal fair housing laws. So I think we, as a city, have to do a better job. And I'm not pointing a finger at it, but it's just there was contradictory advice that the council was receiving as to whether we are violating federal housing laws or not. So we're going to be looking at you and our city attorney to make sure we deal with those issues and not violate the federal housing laws.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to bring somebody else up to the table, and that reminds me, and I appreciate that. But Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, to the committee and members of the public. I apologize for being a little late this morning. But this is a very critical, it's an important issue, definitely impacts the residents I represent in the 9th District. I appreciate Councilman Englander's leadership on this issue and other council members, and I'm anxious to roll up my sleeves and work with you in a collaborative way. I would just caution us to, at all times, keep in mind the importance of being transparent and in being inclusive. The criticism I've heard, and I know there's been a lot of work going on back and forth, but still some feel that their input just wasn't a part of the discussion. And so I just want to make sure that we conduct this process in a way that gives a fair hearing to the issues, as you have correctly pointed out, and I'm sure other members have too, the critical importance of it. The implications certainly are wide-ranging, not just individual districts, but citywide. And we wanted to just make sure that we're developing the kinds of policies that are positive, that are progressive, that are sensitive, and that are well-balanced. And that certainly is my intent, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on the council and community and stakeholders to make sure we accomplish that.
Well said.
Thank you.
No, appreciate that. And I think you're hearing that echoed through all of us this morning, which is absolutely that intent. I appreciate that articulation. I'd also like, if I could, invite somebody from the city attorney's office up, because as I see this, if there's somebody from the city attorney's office here, that I think it's critically important that as we move forward in this, that we have our expertise in housing, that we have our expertise in planning. As Mr. Huizar said, we had some issues that were brought up that some cause or concern or of ensuring that moving forward now, we won't be in violation of any laws, whether they're federal, state, or otherwise. And so we want to ensure that that we always have a city attorney that's an expert as part of this working group as well. So, Ms. Brothers, good morning. Thank you very much. And if you could just give us a little bit of a thumbnail of your involvement in this up to date, and as we move forward on this, we'll have an understanding of your knowledge on the issue as well.
I started working with planning and building and safety on this several years ago as well, probably back from 2008. And we have given written and verbal opinions all the way through. I will say to some of your concerns, Councilmember Huizar, that my office speaks with one voice. And so when I represent the city attorney's office, I'm representing not just the land use side, but the side that also advises the housing department. I am not here only for one division of the office. I'm here to represent the entire office. And so the advice that we have been giving has been vetted all the way through with all the different deputies up to the top, and it will continue to be so.
Yeah. And I wasn't saying that internally within the city attorney's office, but just generally in the discussion. Toward the closer to the time we were to vote on this, we just got different opinions, not within the city attorney's office, but different stakeholders. And so we just need to clear that up to make sure that we're very clear on where we are and what that means.
And absolutely, and I couldn't agree more. I think this is a very important thing, which is why our office has been so involved really every step of the way.
So we'll ensure that we do a deep dive and all of those discussions and concerns that come up from various stakeholders are well vetted, that we have clarity and opinions that are transparent and people understand for discussion as we move forward in the process with the various committees. Mr. Fuentes.
Yes, so I wanted to ask, now that we've got the city attorney and Frank in the building and safety here, help me sort of draw for me the vignette of some of the typical challenges that you find when you're trying to bring enforcement. I have to imagine that it starts with a complaint-driven process, and then ideally it gets to the city attorney's office for some sort of type of enforcement activity. And how does that all sort of weigh in on the renewal of the CUP for these operators? What's your typical sort of challenge that you're sort of seeing in the field, if there is a typical scenario?
Well, it varies quite a bit, site by site. But some of the issues have been the language, definitions of family, definitions of boarding house, that are in the current code. That we haven't been able to take some of the cases forward with them, and further enforcement with them at this time. Also, some of the issues is proof. We have to deal with proof of activities that are taking place inside of the dwelling. So whether access and things like that are sometimes a problem. We have to deal with the Fourth Amendment just like everybody else with search and seizure and things like that. So those proving that some of these activities are going on have been difficult at times. It's easy for us to deal with the maintenance issues because we can see trash and debris, we can see activities, we can see additions or conversions easily from exterior. But some of those others have posed a problem in enforcement.
And so, I think I understand it. If you had clearer definitions, you'd have sort of more categories to look to the code to for trying to bring enforcement actions. But assuming for a second that you're able to generate the proof, as it were, for these enforcement actions, what happens then? Does that, you issue orders? When does it ever get to a point where there, or does it ever get to a point where there's consideration in the CUP process to sort of root out the bad actors?
Well, not necessarily in the CUP process, but in the zoning code, the allowances, we issue an order for what we can prove. So we have an operator, somebody that's operating, whether it's this type or any kind of order that we issue. If they don't comply by the timeline left on the order, we then schedule a city attorney hearing. And after that, if they don't comply, the city attorney hearing officers give them an amount of time to comply. If they don't comply after that, and we still have evidence of the violation continuing, they will file a criminal case against the property owner or the operators, whoever it may be. We've had some success, and the city attorney's office is very cooperative with us and helping us get to where we need to be when we can prove these cases.
And I guess so when I mentioned the CUP process, it seems to me, let's say I'm a bad actor and I don't run the most habitable place, and I'm constantly getting orders, and I'm either taking care of them or I'm not. At what point does any of that sort of have bearing on the renewal of my ability to run my business?
I'd like to answer that one if I could. Unlike many other cities, in the city of Los Angeles, there is no CUP for boarding house. They are allowed by right. There is no such thing as a CUP for a boarding house. They are allowed by right in just about every zone except our least dense residential zones. So from R3, R4, R5 through commercial, boarding houses are allowed by right. There is no CUP process for them.
And so I guess that speaks to the definition. I mean, are these types of facilities boarding houses, or should they be deemed some other type of facility? So this way we have sort of the ability to make sure that we're balancing out what goes where.
Mr. Bush just leaned forward to me and said, well, that's part of the discussion here.
Okay.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah.
That's okay. That's where we're going to do a deep dive. And so at the next meeting, at the first regular scheduled meeting of this committee, we'll start going into in-depth history of and spending some quality time and understanding what are those differences between the 1956 laws and the 1973 laws. What are some of those definitions that may or may not be antiquated? Or how are they defined or not? Or should they or should they not, or what's a CUP, or how, what's allowed and what's not. So we'll actually go through and spend some quality time to ensure that the general public and the committee and everybody that has a seat at the table understands all of those sort of issues as well. And we can look at federal housing laws and ensure that what we want to do is protect people. And the operators and the community. So we'll look at all of those different elements, and we won't cram all those into one meeting. We'll take bits and pieces of it at a time, so we can have that discussion on each element, so we all understand exactly. And with the idea, though, that we don't lose sight and we maintain focus on exactly, Mr. Price, what you brought up, is ensuring that we have equal protections for all. That we have this done in a transparent manner, that everything that Mr. Huizar brought up as well, and ensuring that we're following all the laws, that there's a housing element that is, and they have a seat at the table. It's critically important, and so that's how I sort of see this, which is why I asked the council president to have a special ad hoc, because it requires that kind of focus. Because it's a critical issue, and I really appreciate you all agreeing to serve on this. I know you're all really busy as well with your own committees and other things going on, and to the public and the stakeholders and the community groups and the expertise and our city staff. This is the beginning of a new process. It's exciting because we have an opportunity to provide protections for those most in need and vulnerable in society, to protect the city family, as well as the communities, and not necessarily in that order. And so we have that opportunity to do that in a very transparent manner. And I know there's going to be a lot of emotions moving forward. This is a very emotional issue. I think we go about it the right way, and we'll be able to accomplish a great deal. And so I want to thank those in advance, particularly the public that has been very involved in this as well, and have a stake in this for many reasons, for being and remaining incredibly professional in this as we move forward. With that, without seeing any other comments, again, we'll go ahead and note and file. We continue to keep getting some additional cards in, that those were filled out as well. Have plenty of opportunity for public input as we move forward on the regular scheduled agenda starting in January. And with that, I wish everyone a happy and safe and healthy New Year, and we are adjourned. Thank you.